Okay. Any more questions or comments before we come back? Yes.
I don't know if my voice...
Yes, very
yes,
clearly.
that's fine.
Okay. We have talked about acquisition, but I would be... this is not a route for some companies like us. Actually.
Which company would that be?
I am from Net Customer. My name is Anu Pate. So I'm interested in partnership opportunities that possibly exist between Indian companies as well as the European companies, and where they can have some synergies and can possibly work together on some projects.
Okay. Any more? Yes.
My name is Sumit and I'm from Macquarie Securities. We've addressed that there's a huge revenue potential, but nobody talked about the margin potential. How profitable is it, Europe vis-a-vis US?
Okay, the question was how profitable is Europe from a margin point of view versus the US. The question is from Macquarie Securities. Yes, there was someone behind. Yes, sir.
My name is Sanjay Kumar. I work for France Telecom RX. My question is to Mr. Polito. I have a feeling that sometimes French businesses are driven by the government, whereas in India the businesses are driven by the entrepreneur. So in that context, I have also seen that when two political leaders of two countries agree, France or China for example, business happens between two organizations. In Indian context, it's always entrepreneur. So from this particular purview, how do you think we can promote business between the two countries?
Okay. Anyone else? I saw one more hand somewhere. No. Okay. Sudeep, do you want to start off with the first one?
Well, the acquisitions that we have done in smaller countries have not been driven by the market in that country, but driven more by competency gap fulfillment. We find that different countries in Europe have specialized and niche competency better than some other countries. For example, if you take a vertical slice of Europe, we clearly feel that there is more happening in telecoms in Europe than it's happening in telecoms in the US, for example. A lot of build-out is happening in the emerging markets, but a lot of new deployment, innovative deployment is happening in Europe. And Europe is streets ahead of US in that market. Likewise, we feel that manufacturing, there is not much happening in the US, there's more happening in Europe. So if we have to get competencies in those areas to be able to serve IT services, we look for those acquisitions whichever country we have them. I'll give you a totally non-IT example. We also have a division in Wipro which is into high-precision hydraulic cylinders. And we approached the acquisition in that from a market perspective because we want to address a market. And we did an acquisition of a company called Hydro Auto in Sweden, which has about 700 people, but 4 plants in Sweden and 1 plant in Finland, in north of Arctic Circle. But that is addressing, and that has made us the third or second largest hydraulic cylinder company in the whole world supplying to excavators. So we do have an approach of a market-based acquisition, but occasionally more often it's a competency gap fill-up based acquisition that we target.
Okay, Stefan, the point about margins in Europe, while they may be growth markets, while we need to address them and we'll come to some of those issues, your sense of how doing business is from a profitability point of view?
I would say the margin issue is a serious one, and that's also the reason why you will not see anytime soon, I think, mega transactions where Indian companies would try and take over very large European entities in the space, because it would basically be so earnings dilutive that they cannot afford that without ruining their own stock market position. It is true that the margins are lower, and it is probably also true that the margins are arguably, at least in some areas, lower than in the US. But I think that's going to change. And I also think that you will see an acceleration of the business in general through 2 factors, one of which was already mentioned. One is if an Indian company buys a Chorus or buys an Arcelor, or buys a Beta Farm, or may buy a Merck generics in Germany, then there will be most likely pretty high impact decisions on outsourcing, and that will be profitable business. Why shouldn't it? And something similar will come from a totally different end, which is what I think the whole paradigm shift in private equity. Not only is private equity and the buyout funds presently looking at the IT space itself as a target, but also increasingly private equity plays a role in European industries, and that is across sectors, from banking to manufacturing, really across sectors. And there will be a lot of pressure on increased profitability in those large companies that private equity is taking over. Often this will be provided by service providers that these private equity firms will probably have a relationship with or even own. But all of this will add to, I think, a different model in the margins question as well.
Okay. Phil, can I put this question to you? I mean, I think Morgan Chambers put out a study saying that how in the UK you would see a lot of contracts getting fractionalized and split into much smaller contracts. I think you talked about an average deal size between 28 million to 900 million pounds, sorry, and that's going to change in maybe in the coming year and the year after that. Now, if you were to look at how contracts are going forward, and also maybe try and address this margin question that's been brought up, particularly in the case of continental Europe, what would be your?
Okay, I think it's an interesting trend, and it represents obviously an opportunity, but a threat as well. From the point of view, let me just go back to a perception issue that wasn't covered before, and I'll hopefully say something just as controversial and potentially rude as everybody else. From the point of view of Indian companies, the very best of them are actually victims of their own success from a marketing and a brand perception point of view. You have, because of the success mainly in the States, a perception that you do good, very low-cost, process-oriented, low-level tasks. So there is an image perception whereby you do labour arbitrage extremely successfully. You don't do innovation, you don't do added value. To bring in a couple of the questions, that offers in itself major threats. Number one, if you are commoditized into low-level labour arbitrage stuff, then if you have a partnership with anybody in Europe, then they're going to do the cherry-picking of the interesting, nice, sexy tasks, defining process and building new environments, etc., and look to back-end it with the boring, mundane, relatively low-level skill or the shift work type code-cutting operations. Now, I know from experience that that's absolutely not true. However, there is a perception in the marketplace that still exists that says you do labour arbitrage, commoditized stuff. This is a successful model. It's perpetuated by the successes of the states, who are, let's face it, extremely short-termist and very, very bottom-line focused. So they're not going to pay for anybody to innovate for them, but they will pay for virtually anybody to do boring stuff for them because of their attention spans.